Okay, we're going to start off with our next breakout session. So welcome back for those of you that stayed, and welcome to those of you who have come in from a different track. This track is around connected government, how the Internet of Things will enable the digital reinvention of government. We've got a moderator, Marlon Attikin, who is the partner in our public service Internet of Things leader, IBM Global Business Services. Marlon is joined today with two panelists. The first, Dr. Joseph Lucky Runzio, hope I said that correctly, who is the Deputy Chief Health Technology Officer from the Department of Veteran Affairs. And joining him is Landon Van Dyke, Senior Advisor, Energy, Environment, and Sustainability from the Department of State. So welcome, and thank you for joining us. Over to you, Marlon.
All right, thank you. Good morning. So today we're going to talk about the Internet of Things, and I've got two distinguished guests with me. Before I jump into a fireside chat with both of them, I want to frame a few things for all of you around the Internet of Things. And essentially, this is the undercurrent of the discussion today. First, the rapid acceleration of technology is driving adoption and use of IoT. So, you know, I've thought of different ways to characterize it. I think you heard a little bit about the rapid growth in technology from Dr. Kelly. But I often defer to this quote that Tom Friedman had in his book in 2016, Thank You for Being Late. This book, he really talks about this explosion of tech in 2007, and he, as a counterpoint, talks to our environment in 2004. And it's interesting. He said, in 2004, Facebook didn't exist. The cloud was in the sky. Twitter was a sound. 4G was a parking spot. Big data was a good name for a rap star. I think that's debatable. And Skype was a typographical error, right? Think about how much has changed since 2004 alone. A lot. And really, what we're seeing now is organizations using IoT to drive improvements in operations and create better experiences. The second point, so I brought up acceleration, rapid acceleration of tech. Second point I want to bring up is this concept of IoT to the nth degree. A few years back, the conversation was really around IoT. Today, it's about IoT and AI. IoT and machine learning, IoT and blockchain. So a lot has actually shifted in the IoT space where we're looking at more technologies and how we can use those technologies against IoT. IBM has a business research arm called the IBV, and we published a paper last year around connected intelligence. And we interviewed over 3,000 folks, people, cross-domain, disciplines, C-level. And it was interesting. We had 4 archetypes that came out of that. Observers in the IoT space, aspirationals, people that want to get involved but just don't know how, tacticians, and then reinventors. And it's the reinventors, fundamentally, that are looking at using AI and other advanced technologies powered with IoT. And then the last point I want to make is this concept of the normalization of IoT. So for many of us, IoT is this thing that we go do, but really, if you think about the generations in front of us, it's part of their DNA. It's part of their surrounding. It's part of the fabric of their life. If you think about IoT in your home environment, how you get to work, your work environment. One example I actually have that I wanted to just really touch on before we jump into the panel. In my house, I had a very intellectual debate with my son, Max. And it was over who's better at using the remote for the TV. And yeah, that's about the extent of the intellectual debates we have in the Attikin household. So we had this bake-off, right? Who could find the channel the fastest? So me, knowing the channels that I need to go to, I got to a range, I clicked up a little bit, found the channel. Him, he just took the device, spoke into it, and got there in a second, right? Speech to text using a remote, feed right to the TV, right? So if you think about that, the generation beneath us, right, and generations in front of us, it's part of their DNA. Ultimately, I won, though. I say I get to control the remote, so that's the good news. All right, so now keep those three things in mind, and we're going to shift the conversation to our guests and our distinguished guests here. So, Dr. Ranzio, tell me a little bit about how VHA is looking at technology, IoT, and even how it could potentially impact the broader health services landscape.
So this is a fun time to be alive. To step on your remote, my son's already figured the problem out. He just calls the Alexa speaker and uses the IR blaster to actually go wherever he wants. It drives me nuts now. But for the healthcare side, all of these technologies matter. Many of you probably have an Apple Watch or another type of smart device on your wrist or on your hip that's tracking steps, heart rate, and other biomedical. So this is interesting as we go forward, because while you're gathering data, very quickly you have more data on your cell phone than all of healthcare has for your existing life so far. So how do we leverage that? That's going to become the next trick. We have to actually figure out how we can detect the presence or absence of disease, so that instead of you going to a doctor's office and having the doctor saying there's anything wrong, the doctor's sitting there and you're telling him, hey, I've got some red flags. How am I going to handle this in the long run? And these are things that we're working on within VA. If you're a veteran, you've probably heard of our My Healthy Vet platform. So right now it's predominantly web-centric. You can go look at our mobile apps. We're quickly coming out with more and more mobile apps, but we're going to have to look to partner more with industry, and we've been doing that, so that we don't have to be the only people. I always get a little dissatisfied when we come up with something really, really good, and the only people we present it to are veterans. We should be helping everyone in the United States that could have any problem with healthcare. So that's where we're working on right now, is how do we do that? And through our VHA Innovation Sandbox, we've actually got approximately 150 vendors, with IBM being one of them, who collaborate with us on a day-to-day basis to help push the envelope.
Great, thank you. All right, Landon, I'm going to shift to you now. So tell me a little bit about Department of State. How is Department of State looking at IoT? I know there's a huge facilities, buildings, enterprise. Can you talk to the group a little bit about what you are doing in the IoT space?
Sure. So my task or my mission at the State Department is to make sure all the American embassies are environmentally friendly and green and efficient and a very, very small footprint. We have about 20,000 buildings around the world and about 14,000 vehicles and 90,000 employees. So for us, up to a couple of years ago, monitoring and doing proper management controls and just seeing where all our assets were depended a lot on human interaction and manual input. And obviously you can lose vehicles by manual input or fat fingering something. So for us, it's really been trying to identify what's not working, what is working, where is it. For some of our facilities around the world, you know, a thermometer on the roof could be broken and could be costing us $50,000 a month in energy bills, because that one $8 thermometer tells us to use the air handlers or not use the air handlers indoors or outdoors, and all of a sudden, you know, we don't realize that our utility bills keep going up for no reason, you know. So for us, it's about shrinking down our footprint, but then keeping a good management track on what's going on. For us, very similarly, on the IoT side, we are gathering tons of data. So prior to us applying IoT devices around the world, we would have engineers beg and plead facility managers to provide them some information about how their buildings are operating. And then they would evaluate and say, we think this is probably what's going on, and then they'd go out to the field and actually see if that's actually happening. Where we're heading, of course, is now we have that information coming back remotely, so our engineers can look at this stuff, and we're already identifying that they're seeing the same things over and over again, which was like, hey, machine learning could probably be applied here, and then have some of that stuff automated so that we know we can put those engineers, focus them on really hard stuff, and have the AI kind of come in and help us smooth out some of this stuff that we regularly see. But on top of that, then using things like virtual reality lenses to allow the people on the ground to guide them through a facility, to know what they should be looking at, to push the right buttons, and then the people back here are able to actually do the audit virtually. It's a game changer both in time and reliability and safety.
Great. All right, so let me shift the questioning a little bit, and I'd like to hear both of your perspectives on this. So many agencies wonder, how do you get started, right? I went back, I teed up a little bit about some research we did, and we have observers, aspirationals, right? There's a lot of people and organizations in that category trying to figure out how do you get started around this stuff, right? And organizationally, how do you build awareness and a culture that supports it? So I'm interested to hear both of your perspectives on how you both started the IoT journeys within your respective organizations.
Oh, you're looking at me first.
Go first.
Well, for us, there's so many stakeholders that are involved. One IoT device on a building, let's say just even a smart meter on a building, has so many different owners or people that want that data. And so for me, just looking around the building, recognizing everybody has their own budget, I try to increase the value proposition by saying, well, if we deploy this, you and you and you will be able to get this type of information. And by doing that, it automatically brings in more resources, but then it forces us to think of the bigger picture rather than an individual scaled project, which is, we tend to do in the government. We will do a project, we'll silo it off, and we come out with the shiny widget, and we tell everybody in the department, hey, we've accomplished this shiny widget. And the moment somebody in the boardroom sits there and goes, that's a great widget, we want in, then you realize that your widget can't be modified to share and to be part of a larger enterprise. So our biggest part was just understanding that we have a larger range of stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. The fun part with governance. So I've had a little bit of a different push because in healthcare, we have a lot of highly intelligent people within our medical staff. So if you ever want to see something get pulled apart, hacked, or utilized without anyone knowing, shadow IT in healthcare will be alive and well no matter how much security you put on it. So we have had IoT devices perpetuating in healthcare in the back end without even realizing it. Stethoscopes became digital. So what do you do with that? People had a photo camera on their phone. So how do you prevent them from taking pictures of interesting medical things? You can't. So you have to kind of mold that to become accepted practice. I guess fortunately, I was one of the rebels in 2009 within VA. So we were rolling out telehealth when I was on the West Coast, and we were telling people to take advantage of these pieces of technology. So we forced the systems to work with different workflows and accept different things. And this became, within telehealth, we started using point-and-shoot cameras and camera phones to get pictures of patients with dermatological issues and inject that into the medical system to become evaluated. And this was at the point where everyone was buying $5,000 cameras and figuring you needed something attached to a computer, and we're like, why? Let's cut out the middleman and just get it moving quicker. And that's kind of progressed. Right now, obviously, I'll point out to the watches and other sensors, but we've got a lot of medical staff that are noticing things. You've probably heard several articles about Apple Watches saving lives, and that's just reality. They're seeing abnormal things happening in the wild, and people are coming in with their data. So we're getting a lot of this pull from our patients that want to see this data being utilized to help them.
Great. Okay, let's shift and talk a little bit about policy. So within your respective organizations, are the policies conducive to launching and growing IoT projects? Are there policy considerations that you would advocate for, that agencies should look at to make it easier to engage in IoT type projects? What's the policy landscape around, and how does that impact you and your respective IoT initiatives?
From my perspective, I say it depends on what your viewpoint is. A lot of people operate where, unless it's blessed, we're not going to do it. I've always been more along the lines of unless it's banned, let's go ahead and try it. And you kind of have to have that viewpoint right now is that technology is changing so fast. If we wait for information security to catch up, if we wait for everything to catch up, we're going to be so behind the curve that for us to implement something is going to cost either a lot or we're going to be implementing things that are 2 and 3 technology generations behind. And from my perspective, it's not acceptable. If somebody comes up with a piece of technology that will identify a disease state 6 months, a year, 5 years earlier, which is actually what they're talking about right now for cancer with a smart toilet, is that you can detect it between 5 and 10 years before the onset of symptomology. So this is huge benefits. So how do we ingest this within the healthcare system? Again, the benefit from my perspective gets to be that our patients are going to see it, our veterans are going to see it far before it becomes a medical practice, and that's going to drive how we have to react.
Right. I would say that as an organization for the policy, they need to set up a safe space for innovators to operate, right? So for the State Department, we essentially had to create our own IoT network to be able to experiment, see all the new technology, but at the same time, you know, adhere to some security and make sure that we're not affecting the rest of the enterprise. The other parts about the policy would be, you know, once you're in that secure, safe space of innovation, you shouldn't be stifling it by allowing certain policy writers to come in and say, well, you know, the rest of the department does it this way. You need to also, you know, have these particular things. Now, you should incorporate things that make sense, but at the same time, if it's an innovation and it's really a pilot area, you have to explore. We're exploring with manufacturers to actually develop IoT devices, and we recognize that some of the policies that we are going to put in place will be things like, if it's an IoT device, it should adhere to a standard IoT protocol versus a makeshift protocol, which, you know, some devices out there have, and some of the leading devices that are really great probably don't have it. But we try to work with the manufacturers to say, hey, can't you incorporate? We love your device, but we can't really use it. And so certain policies out there that help guide both partnership with industry, but also guide us to security is kind of an important thing. But
well, it's a fun thing you said, actually, because one of the things that we've had to do over the past year, we've developed a cooperative research and development agreement with Underwriters Laboratory for developing device security for this landscape. So that as devices mature and as this technology is maturing, we're going to have an expectation of a specific information security and trust set for each type of device.
Right.
So I think that leads well into this topic of risk, right? When you think about IoT, there's a lot of concerns around cyber. There's, you know, and that really is the big focal for many organizations. How can you deploy IoT solutions in secure kind of frameworks? How have you both approached risks in general, not just cyber? What are the types of risks that you think of when you're going through your IoT journeys with your respective projects?
Well, depends what the IoT device is.
Yeah.
We were just talking yesterday actually about so the American embassies in I think 40 different locations now. We have air monitors or air quality monitors, and these are reference grade monitors, so they're something that the science community can actually count on as pretty sturdy data. And the question came up, well, how expensive is the deployment of that, knowing that we had to, you know, put the right infrastructure in place and all of this. And then we just had to weigh out the risk of, okay, well, it's going to cost this much, but we have, you know, 600 employees, U.S. personnel in that location with their family members. And if they are not aware of what the health risks are for themselves and for their family, then there is a liability as an employer of sending individuals to certain locations and not giving them the proper information to take preventative measures, right? So then it's just, you're weighing the risk. Well, is it this or is it, you know, so.
And that's the same idea. If you have a Fitbit It's a relative dumb device, but why are we going to worry about throwing everything for cybersecurity at it if your steps are off for the day? We're going to have a judgment on each type of device, and then is it going to be utilized for medical diagnostic and treatment? At certain points, it's going to require an extremely high level of security because we want to be able to trust that device in a life or death scenario. But until you hit there, you have a lot of gradation. Even for a simple heart rate monitor, you're not going to be prescribing surgery based on only that value. We're going to have a lot of other devices. You're going to come to the hospital and actually have much more diagnostics before that is trusted for recommending a treatment.
Mm-hmm. What about interagency collaboration? Do you see a lot of interagency coordination collaboration in the IoT space?
That really depends on what's going on. In healthcare, we're actually starting more collaboration. I think from the discussions we had earlier,
Yep.
we're probably
We're going to have some more. Yeah.
Aren't we all three going to collaborate now after our...
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. Going back to just the policy part, the API policy, where agencies have a place where they can share securely data between agencies, makes it a lot easier for us to collaborate, right? So just putting that in place will probably encourage a lot. The State Department for the air monitors unit, just by itself, we collaborate with EPA. So we have all of our data get pushed to EPA and let their scientists, because we're not scientists, we let their scientists take a look at the information, understand it, massage the data, and then present it to the public. We recognize that we're in locations they're not, and so there's that collaboration where some of the IoT devices are on our end, but some of the analytics are on their end. So,
yeah.
And there's a lot going on in healthcare between CDC, HHS, VA, and DoD right now for data sharing and collaboration. Specific to IoT, IoT kind of becomes anecdotal. It has to be shared as part of the greater data sharing requirements. And that's going to be a little bit of fun. I always joked previously that we shouldn't be calling telehealth anymore. We've gotten to the point of where that's the standard of practice. So why is it that we're still segmenting it and calling it that? We don't call it when you call your phone for your medical staff phone care. It's just healthcare.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about data, because I think we started. What kind of? I mean, how big is your data getting when you embark on your IoT project?
extremely small. Extremely small. Actually, it's kind of interesting because the storage, the capability of storage, keeps exponentially increasing as we keep bringing on new devices. So. Yeah, 15,000, we were talking about this earlier, right? I got 15,000 data points coming off of one building over the course of 3 years, and it was like actually 11 buildings at the time, and we didn't even crack a gigabyte worth of data, right? So it's small, but how we handle it, depending upon what data we're storing, depends on how long we have to hold it, and I'll let you talk about that.
So we have a little fun part in healthcare right now for our data archiving and requirements. And it's something that I'm challenging industry to really help us with, because today our IoT data is going to be very small. But if I ever accept IoT data as part of the medical record and I start getting 24/7 data streams from individuals such as myself, we have an archiving requirement of medical information to be stored for life plus 75 years. So think of that.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. As long as the person's alive plus 75 years afterwards.
Okay.
And my data, just to give you a little spot example, 5 years of data, handfuls of sensors on my iPhone, 50 megabytes. So it's very small, except when I start talking about 20 to 30 million veterans across the United States, and now I'm going to store, say conservatively, they live for 90 years, and then we add another 75 years onto that.
Right.
That data storage requirement blossoms quite quickly.
Right. Certainly a data challenge.
And the data is also, it also goes back to bandwidth and what you're trying to do. So where we're already looking around the bend of, we're pushing data to the cloud, we're using analytics, AI to run through all of that. But we recognize on a daily basis this bandwidth of data going back and forth is actually going to, it's consuming, it's costly at a certain point, and it's, we're going to have performance issues. So the question already becomes, well, what are we going to have on our edge device on that site, and how much are we allowing it to store there, and how will we handle the transfer or that edge device, what it is learning, how is it passing that information back and forth on a, not a periodic basis, but not on a constant 1 minute data point. So it also just depends what you want to do with that data after you receive it.
So let me shift it a little more technical now. So one of the things we often see in the IoT community is there's proprietary type solutions, there's very open solutions, and the power is really getting data and bringing data together. Do you encounter a lot of those challenges of getting access to data with IoT solutions, or is that something you put out there as a requirement, like, because it's fundamentally about bringing data together and getting analytics on that data?
So I'd almost change that.
Yeah.
We don't need to bring the data together into a data store all the time. Within healthcare, if we're able to develop analytics and push that to the local device and just have the problem be sent as a data packet, that would be far more efficient. Now, on the flip side, if you're going to participate in a clinical trial, if you're going to be part of health research, yes, then we would need all the data set, we would need to have things going, because there's all the unknowns that could be happening. But for the average person, they're going to have more knowns for their healthcare problems in the long-term future than unknowns.
Great.
I was just actually thinking about some of the algorithms that we were talking. So one of our IoT devices that we have on our embassies is we look at the harmonics of the electricity that we're getting from the grid, right? And we do that so we understand the life expectancy of our equipment that's on our compounds, because we're getting bad energy, we know it's going to shorten the lifespan of it. But because we have those harmonics, we also can put an AI, deep learning, machine learning background to it, where we can actually start predicting when we're going to get brownouts or blackouts. And that becomes an algorithm which is relative to that particular community, but it's something that we as an agency could just share publicly, openly, and just say, any other entity in the area that would like to know if you're about to have a brownout or a blackout, here's the algorithm, you guys can apply it yourself. And it would actually have an effect on the economy. If there's a manufacturing plant or if there's offices, if they get a blackout, you're going to lose. It has an economic impact to that community. And it's just something that traditionally organizations that had enough resources to do that made those things proprietary. But as the government, federal government, with more of an open door policy on our information, those are things that we're able to just share. So.
Great. All right, so we have a few minutes left, and just to kind of bring this session to close, I thought it'd be interesting for our audience here to hear a little bit about what's next for each of you, your thoughts in terms of what's the next IoT challenge for both of you.
No, go ahead.
Again, as we're collaborating with industry and other government agencies, we're just going to continue that. My real challenge is going to be to influence medical publication. We need algorithms to come at the basic level for medical publication in either code or pseudocode so that they can be applied widely to the population, instead of us having to create them at each healthcare system, within each medical record, within each type of device.
Yeah, and then it actually kind of feeds into what I was thinking on the AI part, where you have your algorithms, and just for us, and when we're looking at a building, after a year of algorithm creation, I know the pattern of my elevators, my lighting, my plumbing. At a certain point, I don't really want to have to go back to the cloud to have it analyze all that stuff and be the central body. I want to be able to modulize that AI part and put it on my edge device and on the site, so I don't have the bandwidth issue. But it's also faster and it's more reactive, and you can do more. So it becomes a nerve rather than the brain. So that's kind of our challenge right now.
Great. All right, I think with that, we're going to close our session. Thanks for joining and attending. All right.
Thank you.
Hey, this is good. This is good.